They say that love may be dangerous as well as beautiful. We examine a tragic case today that highlights this uncomfortable reality. Tragically, Shannon Starbucks, a 40-year-old lady seeking a new beginning, passed away too soon. This example illustrates how her journey for happiness and independence took a tragic turn and ended in tragedy. The 42-year-old mother of 5, Shannon Starbuck, was a firm believer in the prospect of fresh starts that frequently accompany reaching 40. This achievement, for many, ushers in a time of self-discovery and rediscovered confidence. Shannon was not an exception, having gone through the hardships of a difficult marriage and a subsequent divorce. Finally living life on her terms, she looked forward to enjoying her independence and forming new relationships. But Shannon's dreams were cut short before they could even begin. She was discovered dead on the bedroom floor of her house on December 3, 2011. It was a sad and unsettling scene. An erotic massager was placed on Shannon's stomach while she lay provocatively on her back as if she was making a conscious effort to embarrass herself even in death. There were scratches and bruises all over her body, suggesting a rough fight. Subsequently, the medical examiner verified that a stun gun was used to cause several of these injuries. Even with these injuries, strangling accounted for the majority of deaths. An unfortunate picture emerged from the preliminary findings, which revealed that Shannon had sustained significant injuries and had ultimately been killed by being strangled. Due to the fact that her body had been moved after her death, it was clear from the staged scene that took place in her bedroom that her murderer wanted to humiliate her both physically and after her death. The investigation into Shannon's death was not only challenging for the law enforcement officers who were working on the case, but it was also challenging for them to identify the person who was responsible for her death. In the beginning, Clay Starbuck, who had previously been married to Shannon, was concerned about her disappearance. On December 2, 2011, Clay reported to the authorities that he had not received any communication from Shannon since the previous day. At 3 o'clock, he stated that Shannon had sent a text message to their daughter, making a statement saying she was not feeling well on December 1st and requested that she refrain from picking up the children from school until their father had returned. Clay, on the other hand, was unaware of these arrangements, and he had disconnected his phone. Following the inability to communicate with their mother, their adolescent son Logan and her younger siblings found themselves at their father's residence. As a result, Clay made the decision to spend the night with their father. Clay was surprised and concerned when Shannon did not show up for a school basketball game that was scheduled to take place later that evening. Shannon was expected to attend the game. When he went to check on Shannon the next morning, he found that the front door was locked and the blinds were drawn. He was curious about how she was doing and wanted to make sure she was okay. The children had been driven to school by him. Clay made the decision to call the authorities after he was unable to enter the building, and his anxiety continued to grow. At the time that the police initially went to Shannon's residence, they did not find anything that was out of the ordinary. However, after allegations were made by both Shannon's mother and a friend that they were unable to get in touch with her, the authorities got more interested in the case of Shannon. On December 3rd, those individuals returned to Shannon's residence with a warrant, and in order to gain entry, they broke the latch on the door. What they discovered inside was even more terrifying than they had anticipated it to be. The interior scene of Shannon Starbuck's house was not only scary, but also implied that the story will end in bloodshed. Something horrifying was discovered by the police officers when they entered her bedroom. During the time when Shannon's body was lying provocatively on the ground, an erotic massager was found on her stomach. I have the impression that this arrangement is a deliberate attempt to drag her down after she has passed away. There were a number of traces of trauma that were apparent on her body, including a number of scrapes and bruises, some of which were later linked to a stun gun. In addition to the blanket being tucked under the bed, the sheet was nowhere to be found. In addition to the mobile phone and journal belonging to Shannon that were found on the dresser, the mattress cover was found to have crimson streaks that were most likely bloodstains. After conducting a thorough investigation into the matter, forensic specialists arrived to the conclusion that the bathroom mirror and the massager's box contained many latent fingerprints. In addition, a significant amount of DNA evidence was collected from a variety of locations, including Shannon's face, neck, and nails, all of which indicated that she had been involved in a struggle. Following a more in-depth investigation, it was found that Shannon had been assaulted while her body was still damp from having just gotten out of the shower. As a result of the fact that the stolen sheets were found in the washing machine, it is possible that the perpetrator intentionally attempted to destroy evidence. This detailed and intricate painting depicts a violent conflict as well as a planned attempt to humiliate Shannon even after she had passed away. As the detectives conducted a more in-depth examination of the evidence, it became clear to them that the individual who was responsible for Shannon's murder was someone who was close to Shannon. In a short amount of time, the inquiry would unearth a convoluted web of betrayal, retribution, and jealousy, which would ultimately result in a shocking conclusion. Clay Starbuck was definitely in a state of distress when he learned about Shannon's passing. The disheartening scene that Clay encountered when he arrived at Shannon's residence, which consisted of police cars parked and yellow tape used to fence off the property, was not anything that Clay had anticipated seeing. Clay provided the authorities with his cell phone, fingerprints, and DNA samples for the purpose of identifying him as the primary informant and person of interest. He cooperated totally with the authorities. In response to the questions, he was forthright and truthful, providing an account of their co-parenting arrangement as well as his travels on the day that Shannon was last seen. Clay offered some insight into Shannon's life after the breakup, stating that she had turned to online dating in order to find companionship and possibly even a new beginning. Clay asserted that Shannon was still a beautiful woman who had a large number of admirers and that she might have been seeing more than one man at the same time. It was because of these particulars that the investigators came to the conclusion that one of Shannon's potential suitors might have been involved in her death. Clay's demeanor and insights into Shannon's life made the case more problematic by raising the likelihood that her relationships might be an important component of the investigation. This was despite the fact that Clay was cooperative. The circumstances behind Shannon Starbuck's passing were properly and extensively probed. Her neighbors and anyone else who could have heard or seen something weird around the time she disappeared were the first people the detectives interviewed with after she disappeared. A thorough investigation was conducted at the crime scene, during which DNA samples, fingerprints, and any other evidence that might have been there were collected. Shannon's autopsy revealed that she had suffered from 10 cracked ribs, many bruises, and chest injuries as a result of a stun gun. This information was extremely important in determining the circumstances surrounding her death. The cause of death was determined to be strangulation, and there were evidence that she had been transported between facilities after she had passed away. During the course of their inquiry, the authorities looked into everything from Shannon's personal life to her online dating activities and other parts of her life. The fact that she had been communicating with other men, two of whom turned out to be fascinating, was revealed to them. Immediately following the verification of his alibi, Tom Walker, who had arranged a date with Shannon, was found not guilty of any of the charges against him. John Ken Lane, a different individual who had acquired a fictitious name, was also investigated. However, he was finally released from custody because his alibi was able to be verified. The investigation took a dramatic turn when it was discovered with the help of forensic research that Shannon had called 911 in the early morning hours of December 1st. In spite of the fact that the chat was brief and consisted just of cries and rustling sounds, it was clear that Shannon was in excruciating pain not long before she died away. The use of GPS data allowed for the establishment of a time frame for the crime, as it confirmed that Shannon was at home when the call was received. Furthermore, the fact that messages had been received from Shannon's phone after her death raised the idea that the perpetrator had attempted to fool the investigators who were investigating the case. The emphasis returned to Clay Starbucks as investigators assembled the evidence, including DNA results. His first alibi started to fall apart under investigation, and his samples and the crime scene's DNA were matched. This discovery, along with comments he made that were inconsistent, and his knowledge with Shannon's routine, resulted in his arrest on February 6, 2012. Following his 2013 trial, Clay was found guilty of first-degree murder with aggravating circumstances, as well as desecration of human remains. His life sentence without the possibility of release brought an end to a devastating chapter in the Starbuck family's past. The investigation uncovered a murderous tale of love motivated by anger and jealousy. It emphasized how intricate human relationships are and how disastrous it can be when they get out of hand. The life and tragic death of Shannon Starbuck serve as a sobering reminder of the perils of love, justice, and awareness. Shannon Starbuck was well known for her kind demeanor and contagious grin in her small, tight-knit neighborhood when her life first started. Her early years were characterized by a strong desire to serve others, which ultimately brought her to a profession in healthcare. She met the charming Clay Starbucks in this setting, and he instantly won her over. After starting out as a loving and promising marriage, they had 5 children and high hopes for a successful future together. But as time passed, the dynamics inside the Starbucks family started to change. A large family's anxieties, competing goals, and financial strains all had an impact. The relationship between Clay and Shannon grew more and more difficult, characterized by frequent disagreements and times of emotional detachment. Their marriage grew more strained in spite of their best efforts to keep things peaceful for the benefit of their kids. Following over 10 years of matrimony, Shannon and Clay made the decision to separate in 2009. There were several disagreements regarding custody and financial settlements during the tense process. Although they both tried to move on, their resentment frequently led to new arguments. Despite these obstacles, Shannon was resolved to make a fresh start. Accepting her 40s as a time of change, she set out to reconstruct her life and rediscover happiness. As a result of her quest for self-awareness, Shannon turned to online dating in the hopes of finding the kind of connection she so much needed. In the meanwhile, she concentrated on her work and her kids, trying to establish a secure and caring environment at home. But efforts to patch things up with Clay frequently fell flat, and their final split was characterized by a decided resolve to go on our own. Following Shannon's untimely death, law enforcement turned its attention to finding her perpetrator. Given the turbulent nature of his relationship with Shannon and the date of their most recent exchanges, Clay Starbuck came under intense scrutiny right away. He offered an explanation, saying that on the day Shannon was last seen alive, he was preoccupied with work and other obligations. His account was carefully checked by the authorities, who compared his assertions to phone logs, security footage, and witness accounts. Investigators focused on Shannon's private electronics and conversations at the same time. We looked into her computer, phone, and social media accounts to see if there were any messages or movements in the days before she passed away. Following her online dating adventure, Shannon discovered a list of possible suspects, all of whom showed differing levels of interest and engagement in her life. 2 people stood out as noteworthy figures of interest. Shannon had lately dated Tom Walker. He was questioned but soon cleared after a credible alibi was established. Subsequently, the inquiry concentrated on John Ken Lane, the individual with whom Shannon had been corresponding using a false identity. Although his evasive actions sparked suspicions, additional research showed that he was not present when Shannon died. As the investigation went on, forensic evidence started to become increasingly important. Although DNA evidence from the crime site appeared ambiguous at first, relentless efforts led to the identification of important pieces of evidence that connected Clay Starbucks. The authorities were able to piece together Shannon's possible involvement, thanks to his comprehensive understanding of Shannon's habits and contradictions in his alibi. An important turning point in the case came with Clay's eventual arrest on February 6, 2012. His trial took place in 2013 despite his early cooperation due to the growing body of evidence against him, which included behavioral irregularities and DNA matches. His conviction for first-degree murder under aggravating circumstances and desecration of human remains followed the trial's conclusion. The hunt for Shannon's killer came to a sad end when he was found guilty and given a life sentence without the chance of parole. The terrible demise of Shannon and the rise and fall of the Starbucks family serve as a stark reminder of the brittleness of human connections and the lasting effects of unsolved disputes. Shannon's narrative serves as a powerful reminder of the value of asking for help and assistance when going through a difficult moment in one's life, as well as the unwavering pursuit of justice for those who are unable to advocate for themselves. A crucial piece of evidence in the intricate and tragic case of Shannon Starbucks came from Shannon's own phone. Upon locating an untraceable 911 call made from her phone the night before she passed away, investigators were immediately suspicious. The brief call, which ended before any information could be shared, suggested that the person was in severe distress or that they were trying to get help. After looking through Shannon's phone more closely, a concerning pattern emerged. Investigators had cause for concern when they discovered that she had sent many messages from her phone following her death. Experts concluded that these texts were sent by someone else in an effort to fabricate a timeline or conceal their tracks because their tone and substance did not match Shannon's typical communication style. The differences in these texts focused the investigation's attention more intently on Shannon's acquaintances, especially Clay Starbuck, Shannon's ex-husband. Clay's complex and frequently tense relationship with Shannon was a major factor in his rapid rise to suspicion. His activities after Shannon's death were investigated and found to be inconsistent and suspicious. Even though Clay initially cooperated, subsequent inspection revealed cracks in his alibi. A more comprehensive picture of Shannon's death became apparent as investigators attempted to piece together the chronology of her last hours. Gaps in Clay's story were brought to light by forensic examination and painstaking reconstruction of the events on the evening of December 3, 2011, which also put him close to the crime scene at crucial times. Physical traces and DNA evidence gathered from the crime scene pointed more and more to Clay's involvement. The finding of Clay's DNA on Shannon's body and in parts of the house he denied being in was one of the turning points in the investigation. His alibi was severely undermined by the forensic evidence and the contradictions in his assertions regarding his movements. Investigators also discovered behavioral patterns in Clay's past that portrayed a troubling image of a violent and manipulative man. Shannon had confided in close friends and relatives about her worries about Clay, worries that were even more pressing after the probe. Her concerns about his volatile behavior and short fuse proved essential to comprehending the possible sequence of events that resulted in her murder. These anxieties, which were recorded in emails and chats, gave the growing body of evidence against Clay a terrifying background. On February 6, 2012, Clay Starbuck was taken into custody and accused of Shannon's murder after a strong case based on forensic evidence, witness accounts, and behavioral analysis was assembled. The evidence against him was laid out in detail during the trial that followed, including the incriminating DNA results and the examination of the 911 call and post-mortem texts. The prosecution's timeline and evidence were contested by Clay's defense, but the forensic evidence and the updated sequence of events proved too strong. After the jury returned a guilty verdict for first-degree murder and desecration of human remains, Clay was sentenced to life in prison without the chance of release. Although Clay Starbuck's arrest and conviction provided some closure in the case, Shannon Starbuck's untimely death devastated her family and the community. The case emphasizes how crucial forensic evidence is in solving complicated crimes and how important it is to heed domestic concerns and warnings. Shannon's narrative serves as a sobering reminder of the possibility of covert violence in otherwise unremarkable lives, as well as the unwavering pursuit of justice in the face of severe loss. Both the local community and the media were deeply engaged in Clay Starbuck's murder trial, which he was charged with in the death of his ex-wife Shannon Starbucks. The prosecution skillfully put out their case against Clay, assembling a strong story of opportunity, premeditation, and overwhelming forensic evidence. The DNA evidence that connected Clay to the crime scene and Shannon's body, along with the dubious 911 call made from Shannon's phone and the text messages sent after his death, formed the basis of their argument. Prosecutors further emphasized the tense dynamic between Clay and Shannon by calling witnesses to discuss Shannon's anxieties and their tumultuous past. In the months preceding her death, friends and family recalled Shannon's worries about Clay's volatile temper and her attempts to safeguard herself. The prosecution presented evidence of a guy who acted out of a strong need for control and retribution and who was unable to accept the end of his marriage. Clay defended himself by claiming that the evidence against him was circumstantial and that he had no intention of hurting Shannon. His legal team contended that other possible suspects had not been carefully probed and that the DNA could have been passed innocuously during ordinary visits to see his children. Nevertheless, the jury was not sufficiently persuaded by these arguments to remain skeptical. Following several days of discussion, the jury returned with a unanimous decision. First-degree murder and destruction of human remains were found to have been committed by Clay Starbucks. Given the heinousness of the crime and the deliberate attempts to hide it, the judge sentenced him to life in prison without the chance of release. Clay's legal team appealed, citing procedural inconsistencies and contesting the way the forensic evidence was interpreted. The appeals court, however, maintained the initial decision, dismissing the defense's arguments as unfounded. Clay Starbuck is still behind bars as of right now, his appeals having been exhausted and his conviction standing. Shannon Starbuck's murder and her ex-husband Clay Starbuck's conviction that followed had a profound effect on her family and community. Particularly, Shannon's children have had the twin pain of witnessing their father found guilty of the murder and losing their mother in such a cruel way. In the wake of the incident, the family has had to work through the difficult feelings of betrayal, loss, and grief while attempting to start over. The incident is a sobering reminder of the possibility of violence in intimate relationships, as well as the serious repercussions that might result from unresolved disputes and unbridled aggressiveness. Shannon's terrible passing serves as a reminder of how important it is to take threats and anxiety seriously and to make sure that those who are in danger have the assistance and safety they require. When one considers the fallout from Clay's actions, it becomes evident that his incapacity to get over his bitterness and fury had disastrous effects. Shannon's murder has had repercussions that go well beyond her immediate family, impacting the larger community and serving as a constant reminder of both the value of justice and the frailty of life. Even while the judicial system has brought about some responsibility, people who know and loved Shannon Starbuck still feel the loss and emotional wounds. Thank you for watching. I recommend our other crime videos.